Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to see many of you online again. And this is our first Fireside Hour event, which is which is an idea that is based around sort of keeping the minds active, intellectually stimulated in the bleak times between modules and the executive MBA. I see ironic smiles on several people's faces when I said that. And it gives me tremendous pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker of the first Fireside Hour, and that's Dr. Nicola Redi. If I don't mind calling you Nicola, he's one of those few people, I think, who has been able to span three very distinct spheres of professional life. He has outstanding academic credentials, a PhD from University of Aston, an MBA from SDA Bocconi, an undergraduate degree in engineering from Politecnico di Milano. He's got certificates from INSEAD, and he's a Kaizen engineer. So he's got all of these wonderful credentials academically. He's a scientist. So, he's a believer in data-driven, fact-based thinking and analysis. And he is a very successful venture capitalist. I mean, he's got basically 2 decades of experience. I don't want to make you too old here, Nicola, but the truth is it's more than 2 decades of experience of translating sort of scientific innovation into market sustainable ventures. He's managing a technology transfer fund currently. He has several previous venture capital appointments. And I didn't know, actually, until I did a bit of research on Nicola, that in France, do I take it that you speak French, Nicola? Or?
Un petit peu.
Un petit peu. Well, ça c'est très bien. Very good. So the way the Fireside Hour format will work, folks, is that I'm going to ask Nicola in a moment just to spend about 20 minutes talking a little bit about his topic today. Then I will sort of ask a few questions for maybe 10 minutes, get it going, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Nicola, and take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zap, and well, good evening, everyone. I actually changed the background, as it is the Fireside Chapter. I wanted to have the background with the Fireside. Ideally, the topic I'd like to introduce to you, of course, is the topic that where my primary professional occupation is engaged today, which is translating the results of science into businesses. I actually, my historical background is also not just in venture capital. I spent 12 years as an executive in multinational corporations in the industrial sector. So you'll see that basically my approach is much more industrial in venture capital than purely financial. So to make a long story short, let me share some slides, because otherwise I usually, okay, I think you can see my secondary screen.
Hi.
Okay, great. So as I said, the chat I would like to have with you today is around translating science into businesses. Now, there's one buzzword that is everybody's mouth today, which is innovation. But I'd like to be more precise when it comes to defining what real innovation is all about. Many people think that innovation is all about having new ideas, although having a new idea is just having a thought of something new, but everyone has thoughts. Having a new thought is, I think we are already something like 9 billion inhabitants. You can just count how many new thoughts we might have every day in around mankind. But translate those new ideas, new thoughts into something real, that reduces dramatically the numbers. And we got invention. So whenever you have a thought about something new and you make it real, then you have an invention. But we are not there yet, because innovation is whenever that invention has an socioeconomic effect. So unless you have a socioeconomic effect out of an invention, which is a new idea that becomes real, then you don't have innovation. In other words, talking about innovation means creating something new that impacts society or the economy or both of them. Another buzzword is that we have in these days is about revolutions. And let's talk about industrial revolutions. I personally think that the very first industrial revolution, which I count zero, is the invention of mechanical printing by Gutenberg. That really changed completely the way knowledge would have been transferred generation by generation and person from person. While of course we all know that the first industrial revolution was about the steam machine, which led to the revolution in transportation, the revolution in the industry, and that was basically more or less at the end of the 18th century. Then we have to wait for another century to have the next revolution, what we call the second industrial revolution. And the second industrial revolution was between the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, and was led by primarily two discoveries, the electricity and chemicals. And that led to the first mass production processes. And that's why I used the picture of the T-model manufacturing line, because that was one of the tangible results of the second industrial revolution. We also have a third industrial revolution, which took place in the 60s, and that was related to automation. We had the first full automated lines. Robots basically have been introduced in manufacturing processes. Electronics became something that changed the life of everyday's in our, let's say, everyday's life about the mid to the end of the 60s. The fourth industrial revolution, which was basically well, the concept of Industry 4.0 was actually invented by the Germans at the beginning of the 21st century. It's not really about automation, but it's about the connection of human beings and machines together. So what you take whatever is automated and you let them have a dialogue with all the other machines or people. So it's many cases we talk about the digital revolution in manufacturing and our daily lives. So what's next? Because Industry 4.0 is now basically a buzzword that is out of fashion, and we should be asking ourselves what is going after, what will be the next revolution. Interesting, in 2014, deep tech was first used as a new term, and around the deep tech terminology, Boston Consulting Group and other institutions started thinking about that basically the next industrial revolution would be built around deep tech. So I basically put a couple of pictures, both coming from Boston Consulting Group's reports. They are dated around 2017 and 2018. But what is deep tech really all about? When we talk about deep tech, we refer to any technology that is grounded on scientific research, is not easy to be copied, or can be protected through intellectual property. So from a certain perspective, I usually say we are going back to basics, because when there was much noise around the digital revolution, digital transformation, but at the end of the day, digital today is a commodity, is not a technological revolution. Definitely digital transformation leads to change in business models, especially on the consumer side. But nowadays, whenever you see a new startup dealing with digital technologies, they are not bringing new technologies into the market. They are leveraging primarily new business models that are paved on already existing digital technologies. The next generation of innovation will be led by scientific discoveries, and this is basically what we call the deep tech ecosystem. And interesting, deep tech ecosystem is an ecosystem that is created through a joint collaboration between established corporations and startup companies created out of research centers. The process that leads scientific discoveries into the market is called technology transfer. Technology transfer here, I like this picture because it describes the process as a cycle, because actually it should be considered as a cycle in the sense that even the objective of basic research should be given by the feedback of the societal and economic needs that might arise out of, let's say, analysis and on the societal and economic side. So in technology transfer, we drive basic research based ideally on clearly identified needs that we see both in society and in the corporate world, and through a process that goes through the development of that technology, piloting into the market, and then exploiting it in global markets, we basically succeed and we transform science results into global businesses. Technology transfer is a process that might be run through 3 different streams. That really depends on how close the corporate world is to basic research. In some cases, we have technology transfer directly in the basic research phase, where corporations are signing contract research programs with research institutions such as universities. So they're paying universities or research institutions in order to have the rights out of the research outcomes, and then they will be in charge of bringing those discoveries into the market. The second way of running technology transfer is through licensing, which means a research institution goes through the basic research process, makes a proof of concept of the technology, what we call an alpha prototype, an initial test of the technology itself, then files a patent application, which means protects that invention, and sells or licenses the rights, the commercial rights out of that invention to a corporation. That the corporation will be in charge of bringing that invention into the market through their internal processes. The last stream is research spin-off. Basically, research spin-off are new companies which are established based on the intellectual property generated by research institutions. And those companies grow up in the markets and successfully reach those markets unless they are fully acquired by corporations. Definitely, as you might imagine, acquiring a spin-off company which is already in the market is the less risky opportunity for corporations, because you are acquiring a product which is already in the market, so you don't run significantly market and technological risk. But of course, the let's see, the reverse side of the medal is that you have to pay that acquisition significantly. Nevertheless, the technology transfer process is divided into 4 main phases. We start from basic research and we reach full commercialization of technology. On the bottom line, you see that I put the financial needs. In basic research, financial needs are in the order of millions, in some cases even billions. I think about enormous research infrastructure like the CERN. CERN is an investment of dozens of billions. And then in proof of concept, so the next phase, the phase that basically changes the perspective from curiosity-driven, which is typical of basic research, into market-driven, that is the approach that we have in technology transfer. That specific phase is a phase that doesn't require significant investments. On average, of course, if we talk about pharmaceutics, that would be much higher. But usually, a few $100,000 of dollars are enough to get a proof of concept. And then the investment will raise later on, because you have to make investments in full development, operations, marketing. But proof of concept is the least expensive phase, while it's the most complex phase. And it is the most complex because it's the phase where the technology is still far away from the market. So we don't know how well that technology will be perceived by the market. We don't know already the product that will get into the market or the service that will get into the market. But here we are now drafting the concept of that product or that service. And drafting the concept is the most critical phase of any new product development phase, because there you take decisions around how the final concept will, the final product or service will look like, that basically have an impact of 80% of total life cycle cost of the finished product. So here we are very far from the market. We haven't went through the overall development process, but still we are taking decisions that will be there forever and will define whether the new product and service is going to be successful from economic point of view and a market point of view or not. So proof of concept is the most critical phase, not from a financial point of view, but in terms of knowledge. This is why basically the European Association of Research Technology Organizations made the metaphor that creating a successful spin-off company out of research is like launching something into deep space. When you have to launch something, an object in deep space, like the International Space Station, you need a rocket, definitely, but the rocket alone is not enough. You also need fuel. And in order to drive the rocket, you must have a crew of astronauts. And again, you need a fourth element, which is the launch phase. And the launch phase, the launch protocol, how you start lifting off that specific rocket. And last but not least, you must have an infrastructure for the launch phase. All those 5 dimensions are needed to launch something in space. So if we follow that metaphor and considering deep tech businesses, the rocket is what we call minds, researchers, the technology. This is what we need as the basic for a spin-off company out of research, but we need the fuel to transform that outcome of research into a business, and that fuel is given by money. But as for the rocket itself, you need, out of the technology and the fuel, you must have someone who's driving that rocket into space. You need an astronaut, or you need managers. And managers are not researchers. We're talking about a different kind of people. We need people who are very acknowledged and have a significant expertise in the specific industry you want to launch that spin-off company. And those people will be different from the researchers that basically led the discovery and brought the discovery into the market. The launch phase in deep tech is the first customer. How you reach the first customer? The first customer is fundamental because the first customer helps you drafting the product in a way that fully satisfies the need he has and basically the market has. And remember, when we talk about innovation, we said we must have a socio-economic impact. Without customers, you won't have innovation because you won't have a socio-economic impact. Last but not least, infrastructure. Infrastructure means laboratories, prototyping, industrialization, and a real environment where actually you can test in a complex industrial environment, or in a complex clinical environment, an example, the technology, the product that you have, that you want to bring forward. Because everything will have a socio-economic impact if and only if that impact is proven in a complex environment where it's going to operate. So launching a deep tech startup company out of research is like basically speaking different languages. You must speak the language of technology, the language of management, the language of financial world, the language of your customer, and the language of the complex environment you're embedded. The deep tech model is grounded around startups. This is the Boston Consulting Group methodology. Startups are the drivers of deep tech technologies into the market, which are eventually acquired by corporations, but they're basically embedded in networks of different stakeholders. And remember that each of these stakeholders is speaking a different language. Talking about Italy, and this also explains why I'm doing this business in Italy. Italy enjoys a technology transfer investment platform, which was created under the Juncker plan, so the European Commission investment plan. It's a joint investment program by the Italian Development Bank, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, and European Investment Fund. 200 million focused on technology transfer. Interesting, even a French operator, two French operators have been basically joined this platform, and they're running two different funds in technology transfer. Many people know Italy for pizza, mandolino, mafia. Few people know that actually Italy is, if you consider the cumulator of number of citation per research, is #1 in the world, which means that our researchers are very good in publishing. And they're basically, this is the statistics updated up 2017. It's maybe less known, but definitely we have a top class global research system. Even in applied fields like high energy physics, industrial engineering, this is just a ranking page based on the average H index of Italian researchers. So we have significant outcome out of our research institutions, which is not having an impact in the economic sector. And that's why the government decided to have a technology transfer investment platform. But if you recall from my previous slide, proof of concept is the most critical phase, because proof of concept is just a matter of giving the money to a researcher, hoping that he established a good spin-off company. We need all the 5 dimensions that I basically explained to you previously. So what we have done is that we have created a proof of concept process that invests in technology and in people at the very same time, including a specific executive MBA, which was created for researchers, for principal investigators, helping them transforming their ideas into businesses. But we also need a testbed facilities, design thinking approach, transforming technologies into product, and a strategic vision into intellectual property, which goes beyond just filing patents, but has to protect the business models we're investing in. When I talk about infrastructure, we are leveraging, on example, this center, which is a joint venture between McKinsey and the Italian Industrial Association. It's a model supply chain. So if you get there, it's close to Venice. It's 2,000 square meters where 3 different manufacturing lines are simulating 3 different companies working together. And when I say simulating, it's that they are really producing something. So there is a good which is produced. It's basically a fridge component that is produced out of those 3 different manufacturing lines. And all the ancillary processes of the company, such as R&D, purchasing, warehousing, etc., are simulated. This is a training facility and a testbed facility. Why do we need such a testbed facility? Because whenever we are scouting a new technology within the research environments in Italy, and that technology has to be transformed into product fitting the industrial world, and industrial world is a complex one, we are testing those new products directly in this facility. It would be pretty much impossible to have a plant or a company that stops operating and allows you to make a test in a complex environment. But you need a complex environment for making tests. Otherwise, that technology wouldn't be proven in a real life environment. So this is a real life environment where actually the outcome of research is tested from an industrial perspective with the methodology of use case development that comes from a leading consulting company such as McKinsey. Just a couple of examples of our investments, just to wrap up. This is a very interesting one. This is a joint spin-off company from the Italian nuclear physics laboratory and a couple of universities. Here, the idea is it's a revolutionary platform for in silico drug discovery. To make a long story short, we have physicists here that basically discovered that the mathematical modeling that is behind the intermediate states definition of subatomic particles is the very same modeling that can be used for calculating how proteins are created and what is the shape from a chemical point of view of proteins. Why is that relevant? Because nowadays it's almost impossible to shape the folding process of a protein unless you wait for 3 months or 4 months of calculation in the highest power computer that you might imagine. This startup company is able to model the chemical folding process of a protein in a few hours, and basically modeling it enables us to discover what will be the potential pharmaceutical lead for some disease that today we call undruggable. So no fine molecule has been found already to hit that specific disease, which is basically generated and expressed by certain proteins. So we call it an in silico factory of new pharmaceutics for new drugs. The other example is virtual reality created in the perceptual robotic laboratory of the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna. Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna is the highest institution in Italy. It's a graduate school for applied sciences, basically follows the model of École Normale in France. So out of the perceptual robotics laboratory, they basically set up an augmented reality platform that enables inspections and maintenance to be carried out anywhere in the world by unskilled people, which are guided remotely by any number of skilled operators that don't have to be there. Imagine that you can operate real-time exchange of data, streaming of videos, thermal cameras, boroscopes, etc., even if you're located in a platform in the middle of the Gulf of Nigeria, like in oil and gas operations, and you don't have any internet, you just have a satellite line. So with as little as bandwidth as the satellite one, you can have not just a video conferencing, but an augmented reality environment where the expert, which is remotely located, operates as it was in the premises and drives the hands and the work of the on-site engineer. The advantage are terrific, especially in COVID times. For example, we literally commissioned oil and gas plants in the Gulf of Arabia without the need of sending people there. And basically that allowed big companies to start operating, even if it was basically forbidden by traveling was forbidden. And you can imagine how much that would cost to have a plant, an oil and gas plant, stopped for even another week without, this specific technology that enabled the full commissioning of the plant remotely. So I would stop here. Just to wrap up, driving the science results into businesses is not just a matter of giving the money to researchers. You need 5 dimensions to work around, and you need definitely a real life environment where to test technologies and turn technologies into products and services that fit complex environments like the industrial or the clinic one, where they will be eventually used. But this is the future, because the next revolution that we see in terms of innovation in the industrial world will be primarily driven by the results of scientific research.
Thank you so much, Nicola. That was really interesting. I'm not a scientist, so you lost me at times, but I think I got the core message. My first question is, when you had the slide with the Tower of Babel and how many languages do you speak? how many languages do you speak of those 5 languages that you referred to?
Well, I speak the word of research because that was out of my PhD. I spent 12 years leading corporations in both R&D and operations. So I was a plant manager, and then I was in charge of R&D program management at global level in a couple of multinational companies. Spent 12 years doing venture capital, which means I have to speak the language of finance. Those are the languages I'm speaking today. I remember that when I first launched the fund, I was interviewed by a journalist, and he asked me, but what is really your job all about? And I said, well, I think that I can consider myself a multicultural mediator. This is basically my job.
And how do you build credibility with these different stakeholders?
Well, credibility is a consequence of trust. And in order to be trusted, you have first of all to not to be perceived as, let's say, the black sheep or the white fly. So when we talk with the researchers usually, when they know they will be meeting an investor, they are very, very afraid. I mean, they imagine someone who is getting there with the blue suit and just like shark taking whatever they can. So can be strange, but even the dress code changes significantly whenever I'm entering a research department or whenever I get into the European Investment Fund. I don't have the same suit. I'm wearing something different. And then when I talk with researcher, I'm talking about technology. I never mention investment. And whenever I have to mention investment and explain how everything works from an investment point of view, I never send a contract to a researcher. I have to explain contracts as they are from a researcher's perspective, which basically means a contract is a flow chart. And it was really, I'm not joking, but sometimes before sending a contract, I had to make the flow chart of the contract so that the researcher would have been able to read through the contract, because they understand flowcharts, but they don't understand contracts. And when I have to speak with a corporation, I'm speaking the language of the corporation. So I have to understand what are the needs. And sometimes I'm talking and say, well, I know you have that problem, because sometimes, corporations are always showing to the public the face of whatever, that everything goes fine, but we know that there are problems inside. And you have lived in a complex organization, in a complex corporation, you have politics, that whenever you enter a plant, you can talk about technology, but at the end of the day, there will be always a person in front of the machine working. And if that person doesn't want to wear something like an electronic device, no chances he's going to wear, and no chances the technology will work. So you have to know that. And you have to get straight to the point to a corporate manager. So this is the way I'm trying to work.
And what suit are you wearing tonight? Are you wearing your researcher's suit tonight?
No, this is luckily the standard suit of the smart working. In these days, pandemic was very nice, because in smart working, I had conversation even with financial institutions, and those people that usually were in front of me wearing a jacket, a tie, or a suit were just with their pullovers, and in some cases just as they had gym 5 minutes before. So it's much more informal,
right?
Even in Italy.
I'm a believer in context, right? So I think that it's always risky to sort of offer a universal menu without understanding the context, right? So you read all the time about Silicon Valley, and this becomes a bit of a kind of sort of Valhalla for countries in terms of becoming leading innovation centers. How important is the Italian context in framing your thinking about how you take scientific results and turn them into business propositions and successes?
That's fundamental. I basically don't believe in copy and paste models anywhere. The boundary conditions are pretty much different. There is only one Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is different from Israel, which is another place where innovation is definitely, I mean, the startup nation is Israel. And Silicon Valley is different from the New York side, the East Coast. So there's no copy and paste. And Europe is different as well. And even within Europe, there are different contexts. So to answer your question, being in Italy is definitely something that has changed the way we basically leverage some methodologies that we have seen primarily in the US or in other countries, and we try to apply them in our country.
And you know, and briefly, what kind of adjustments would you know, deliberately make in a place like Italy or even Austria, which has a very strong sort of mid-sized sector in industrial innovation? I mean, what differences would you deliberately go about making?
Well, first of all, you should know that it's the way on one side we run investments that are pretty much less speculative as those that you might afford if you are in the US. The numbers are there. So there won't be someone doing a B round with 30 millions in Europe. This is not the statistics, and it won't be in Italy. Okay, just recently made the statistic on my own, and the average investment size in Italy is 2 millions. So I've been asked, why don't you have in your business plan of your portfolio company a B round planned with 40 millions? And I said, simply because there won't be one, most probably.
Right.
So I have to even work on a business plan agreed with my portfolio company in order to reach the financial sustainability of the company without the need of 40 millions investment in the next year. We won't be there. That changes, of course, also the way you get into the market. If your primary customers are small, medium enterprises and not the big corporation, not the consumer world, that would be different. Not to mention that even if you speak about consumers are different in Europe, country by country, region by region. So we can talk about a single market. First of all, we don't have a single market. And second, even from a legal point of view and fiscal point of view, etc. So we are not the US in the EU, but even from a cultural point of view, it's not a single market. You can never speak with a German customer in English. You can never speak with a French customer in English, even in B2B. So that is to say, we have to adapt every time based on the market we have and the financial environment we have. From a research perspective, I mean, dealing with researchers, well, the mindset of researchers is almost the same everywhere in the world.
Okay.
I had the privilege of having in my first fund as advisors, Tim Cook, not the one in Apple, but Tim Cook is basically the person that led Oxford technology transfer since the very beginning. He created ISIS Innovation, which basically is now called Oxford Innovation. ISIS was in the last year not really the best name. And he explained to me, well, when we started the UK was pretty much like Italy today. A professor is still professor, is not an entrepreneur. There are few professors who had an entrepreneurial, let's say, attitude. A researcher wants to make his own career, build a career in publishing and not patenting, if you're a science professor, and that's it. And this is everywhere. Even in MIT, that goes the very same way. What I learned from MIT, the first time I met one of the other advisors who was actually licensing manager of MIT, and he was advisor in our fund, and I asked him, how does venture capitalists here in Boston get the best ideas? Do they go to business plan competitions, etc.? His answer was, no, you have to be in the labs. You have to talk with researchers, and you have to intercept the best technologies before they get out in a business plan competition. Because if you wait for the business plan competition, that will be too late. You have to intercept those ideas inside the labs. And I think that works almost everywhere.
Interesting. Very good, thank you. I'd like to open the floor to our participants. When you ask your question, just briefly say, name and which program you're from at CEU or the organization you're associated with. So I'd like to open the floor to questions. Please go ahead. Please, Sylvia.
Yeah, hello, good evening, and thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. So I am Sylvia Ekres, and I'm currently a participant of the MBA of the class of 2022. And I work in downstream oil and gas industry. I'm a chemist. So I actually had experience as a researcher in those early phases of you had the flow chart on one of your slides where you were showing the different phases, right? And then my experience unfortunately stopped at that research phase, which was government funded. So my question would be how to jump into the next phases, which are then financed by. So you were talking about private funds. Of course, those are different sources, but how does one make the jump from the research phase? Maybe we would even have a proof of concept, but to get the funding from any private organizations. That would be one question, and the second one would be just how is the amount of the investment determined? Based on what? Which factors are weighed?
Okay. So starting from the first question, and thank you very much. Both of them would deserve one evening just to talk about one of those two questions. So I'll try to make the answer short. When it comes to proof of concept funding, this is pretty much new, definitely in the European environment. It's a mixture of public and private funding. I mean, I'm running a private fund, which is backed by public and private money. But when I started doing this job, and I had I was given the objective to run proof of concept investment, and that was 2017. The very same year in Italy, the Polytechnic of Turin, which is one of the biggest engineering institutions in Italy, started its own internal proof of concept fund. So it was some university are now taking some money because they discovered that actually, in order to run what we call the third mission, which is the commercialization of technology, they needed to go further, not just to stop at basic research and file a patent, but also if you file a patent, show that the technology works, potentially with an alpha prototype. So it's something that now many Italian universities are starting investing some of their budgets, or regional governments are giving universities some budget for running proof of concept. The Italian Ministry of Economic Development has made a proof of concept fund just a couple of years ago, which matches the single university investment. And on top of this, we have those private funds like mine. So that was the way that we knew it was required to have that specific funding. And as a system, we started working on that specific tranche of investment in order to ensure that we covered the gap between basic research and seed money. And that was established at a high level, and then bottom up, many universities started doing the same with their own budgets. And this is the way we did it in Italy. At European level, you know that there are typically the European Research Council has a proof of concept funding, which is very difficult to win, but there's good money over there. And this is at least the Italian scenario, but it's not very different from other scenarios. I mean, in MIT, there is a specific foundation, it's called the Despande Center. It's an endowment that was given by Mr. Despande. It was about 16 million euros, and those are focused for proof of concept. They call it ignition grants and starting grants. So they're grants, but they're primarily focused for POC in MIT. As far as the second question is concerned, how much how do we define how much money to invest? That really depends on the investment plan. Each technology is different. Each company is different. So we analyze it. So, I mean, I take a technology, and then based on that technology, we say, what do we have to do in order to reach the market? Which kind of market is that? If it's a medical technology, we know already that we have to go through some clinical trials, depending on, of course, the class of device. So first class, second class, third class, that really depends. And that changes also the protocol of clinical trials. It's all about business planning, which is why I said at the beginning, you need management in a company that is very skilled and very acquainted with that specific industry, because the amount of money that is needed in order to prototype something changes industry by industry and product by product. And if you don't have that experience already, you're not able to determine it. That's why I think I'm invested in industrial technology, because my background is industrial. I don't do biotech, never been in biotech. I'd be a fool to make investments in biotech because I'm not a biologist. So I've just read something on books, but that's not the experience I can bring on the table. And what we are doing is that we have set up a group of managers, very experienced managers in different sectors and different functional, in different functions. So we have the CFO, we have a couple of CEOs, and we're talking about executive people with 20 years experience in executive position in multinational companies, from consumer electronics, B2B software, etc. And that network of managers is running our portfolio companies at the very beginning. So they're dedicated 100% of their time. They're spreading their time in the company, but they are CEOs or CFOs. They're actively working in the company. They're bringing their knowledge in the company. So we are able to go through the proof of concept phase, the seed phase with those very experienced yet fraction managers. And once we see that the company starts going on its own, then we hire people from the outside, which are fully dedicated to the company. And that is the way that we ensure that we have the right experience to make the right analysis of investments and to run the company in the initial phase, where the company wouldn't have the money to pay for an experienced manager 100% of its time.
Does that answer your question, Sylvia?
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions you'd like to ask?
Thank you.
Yes, maybe.
Please, Sharena, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sharena. I'm also from the class of 2020, the MBA. For me, this topic is very new, and but very interesting. Thank you for the presentation. And when you said that corporations are the final customers, it was a bit alarming for me. And the first question that popped out was whether it's mutually beneficial for both sides. And then from what you said, I collected some of the reasons that could be why corporations end up being the final customers. But maybe you could share some more challenges beyond maybe financing that current deep tech companies have.
Okay, I'm not pretty sure I understood your question. So is your question related to why do you consider corporation, is there a threat in having corporations at the end of the process?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the reason why I'm always putting corporations at the end of the process is because as of today, the way we innovate our economic sector, industrial sector, is through what we call the open innovation process. You might have heard about it, open innovation. Open innovation means that you go beyond the boundaries of your organization in both ways. So you insource technology and you outsource technologies. Why is that relevant? Because incumbents in markets, the big incumbents, they have a significant power, and that power is that they are in the market and they control the market. Yet they have understood, especially in the pharmaceutical sector, which was the first that went through the open innovation revolution, they understood that they didn't have all the knowledge inside to properly innovate. There is the famous quote in open innovation that says not all the smart people are working for you. So you have to look for something good outside of your boundaries. And startup companies are the prime, say, vector, because they're very agile. You can establish a startup company with very specific competencies which are outside of the competencies of the big corporation. And think about biotech. When biotech was first invented, we were coming out of a world where pharmaceutics was primarily driven by fine molecules, synthetic molecules. And then there was that tiny startup created out of the chemical department of MIT that said, well, why don't we use bioderivatives? They invented biotechnologies. That startup was actually Genzyme, and you know that Genzyme was a successful one. And why that was acquired? Because in the R&D department of the acquirer, there were no people with knowledge on biotechnology. They were all chemistries, with a chemical background, or either organic or inorganic, but they were chemistries, and that technology was brand new to them. And this is now becoming very common in any innovation process in any big organization. So the big organizations are there, they control the market. They even have the power not to let you in the market. That happened to some of my portfolio companies in the past, okay? They can do that, and that is a threat. But they need innovations to be more competitive than their competitors. So what they will be looking is that they will acquire a company that has already proven a new product based on a new technology in the market and will bring it forward. So they are always at the end of the process. And to give you some figures, if you take 100% the portfolio of venture capitalists everywhere in the world, a percentage which ranges from 85 to 90% everywhere ends up in the hands of corporations. The real exit of venture capitalists are corporations, is not the stock exchange. IPOs are just as tiny as 10%, if not less. Because corporations are innovating through the acquisition or through nurturing startup companies.
Sharina, would you like to come back?
No, thank you. Yeah, my concern and the question was how rewarding is this relationship for the deep tech startups? And it's a bit sad that they are doomed to be acquired by big corporations who are going to become bigger.
Well, first of all, I'm referring of startups which are venture-backed. Now, being venture-backed means one thing, definitely, that you're going to be divested. Because this is our business. Our business is investing and divesting. So if you take the portfolio of investors, there is only one way to get out of an investor, that is being the invested. And the internal return rate that is required by an investor in order to match the risk that is running whenever we are doing a round in our portfolio company is so high that definitely the entrepreneur won't have the money to buy the shares. Okay. This is the first point. So there is a financial reason out of it. But if we generally speak about new companies created out of research, doesn't matter that they're going to be financed by venture capitalists. The relation between an established corporation and a startup company is fundamental in B2B, because the established company has such a in-depth knowledge of the final market, in-depth knowledge of the standards, in-depth knowledge of how products should be packaged, even from a technological point of view, to be effective in a market, that knowledge is fundamental for a startup company to be acquired in order to develop appropriately their products. All our portfolio companies are working together with corporations, even if those corporations are not acquiring them yet, because we capture so much knowledge out of what has to be done in order to create a successful product and a successful product experience in a broad term, that relation is fundamental. The Boston Consulting analysis on how corporations are nurturing startup companies said it clearly. The leaders in innovation in the world are flanking startup companies, even without investing since the very beginning. And interesting, going back to the question related to how much we have to adapt ecosystems to the different world. I was part of the MIT Portugal initiative. In some years ago, the Portuguese government asked MIT to consult some universities and create an ecosystem in Portugal for startup companies out of research centers. And they created a program, which is now a standalone program called Building Global Innovators. And that program, an accelerator program, was based on one very specific idea, that you take a startup company out of university and the first match is not with an investor, is with a B2B customer. So they didn't want them to go to investors, but they wanted to match an investor if and only if they had already found a customer or an industrial partner, because that was the way to prove they have created value and to prove that they might have been successful in a B2B environment later on.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Nenad, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nenad Apostolsky, and I'm a PhD student. Actually, I'm all but dissertation stage now in entrepreneurship. And I was interested to hear about the role of the entrepreneur. Specifically that you mentioned that you bring on board experienced managers to be their CEOs and CFOs. How does that correlate with their agility, and how does that help with the innovation at that early stage?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a very good question. I would say we should be talking about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial attitude more than entrepreneurs. So you're definitely right. I mean, some managers are just managers. So you take them out of their comfort zone, which is a nice office with a nice assistant and a dozen of people just doing whatever they say. And they might be fantastic managers because they make things happen because they are managing people properly, but they have an infrastructure, an organization, and they want it. Here we need people, even with a managerial experience, but with an attitude of entrepreneurship, which means they are willing to take risks. They're willing to work in an environment where we don't know whether we would have cash in the next 6 months. No assistance, no company car, nothing. Everything has to be built from scratch. No ERP. We are establishing ERPs in our companies, but there is no ERP at the beginning, etc., etc., etc. And this is one point. So first of all, the people that we are luckily having within the team of our companies, they all have proven to have that entrepreneurial spirit, although they were formerly managers. And this is one point. The second point, which is as relevant as being entrepreneurial, is how you build up the chemistry between the founders and the manager. So we never force those marriages. We always try to find the right person that fits the culture of the founders, which are inevitably coming from the research world. And every person is different. So we don't force anyone get into one's team. We're always very clear in saying, you will need a CEO. And then we smoothly try to introduce someone and see whether it works. In some cases, it didn't work, and we had to change it. In other cases, it works perfectly. And that depends really case by case. So our job is very much tailor-made, even from the entrepreneurial perspective.
Great. Well, Nicola, we've reached the end of the hour, so we'd really like to thank you for your really interesting presentation and answering all of the questions from the CEU community. Before we let you go, I'd just like to let everyone know that Nicola has graciously agreed to teach an elective on the Executive MBA in new product development. So you'll have an opportunity to take a class. So this is a bit of an amuse-bouche, as we would say in French, and to benefit from Nicola's wealth of expertise across multiple sectors. I don't want to embarrass him, but comparisons to Leonardo da Vinci were crossing my mind as you were talking about science, management, and and finance. But it was really interesting talk. Kicked off the Fireside Hour fantastically well. So I'd just like to say thank you very much on behalf of everybody here tonight, and on behalf of the CEU Executive MBA and the CEU community. And we're looking forward to continuing this collaboration long into the future. We know your time is precious, so we'll call it an evening for now. But once again, Nicola, thank you so much for your talk this evening. Really super interesting, very refreshing. And we're all looking forward to seeing more of you at CEU Executive MBA in the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you. I really enjoyed it, and I really look forward to being in Vienna in May.
Wonderful. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.